Hello, Tiffany. Good morning. Thank you so much for your question. I want to answer this question with as much honesty as I can. And thank you so much for your question. If you ever have any questions about my beliefs, my ideas, no question is off the table. I will always give you the most honest answer I have. And sometimes the question is, I don't know enough to have an opinion about that yet. But I will be honest. Um, So, I want to tell you one thing. I believe that a lot of the members of the church have no clue how much truth and beauty uh, and joy they can have if they were to stick to their covenants and promises and uh, values that they have. I believe that the church has so much wisdom, so much knowledge, and it is up to the individual to discover what's in there. So if a member of the Latter day Saint Church, and any church for that matter, was to live up to the promises and covenants that they make within those organizations, they will be immensely happy. One thing comes to mind is the Garden of Eden. And now I want to tell you something. The way I see scriptures, I see them as truth, but in this sense, I see them as metaphors, metaphors that have survived the test of time, and this is why they're true, because they've survived the test of time, and they're universal. They're based on universal principles. They are based on values that are eternal and universal. So, in the Garden of Eden, um paradise, the word paradise uh, means walled garden. And even in the walled garden, the snake is allowed to be there. And even if you grew up in a walled garden, the time will come for everyone, you, me, as it happened to Adam and Eve, to live the garden. Because there is really nothing valuable about knowing the story unless you get to practice it and live it, live by it, embody it. Just because somebody knows the story doesn't mean that they understand it, because there's 2 points of learning: knowing the story, knowledge, and applying the story and learning the consequences of the story, that is wisdom. And I believe that most people know the stories and understand the stories that, okay, there's a hero, there's a prophet, there is a mother. We see all these characters in storytelling. They call them archetypes. They represent something. And I believe that at some point in life, when we make decisions, when we choose to make these decisions, we get to live our values, and sometimes we are going to be the villain of the story, and sometimes we will be the hero of the story. Sometimes we'll be the nurturer, and sometimes we'll be the wise old man or woman in the story. And we are going to be tried and tested. We cannot do that from the safety of the garden. And that's what a lot of people don't understand, is that, and this is for across all religions and all belief systems, you can do, I like to call them the rituals. I like to compare them to dress rehearsals. You're a dancer, you understand what a dress rehearsal is. And I believe that often when we go to church, we are reminded through these dress rehearsals. When you go to the temple, I don't know if you've been to the temple, but there's nothing secret about the temple. If people take the time to read the Old Testament, they will find all those things that are talked about in the temple in the Old Testament. So there is no secret. It is sacred if you choose to act out what you believe. But the story in itself does you no good unless you practice it. So sooner or later, the time comes for every individual to leave the garden, because it does you no good to practice, 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 and never act it out. And to act it out, you have to be faced with decisions. And then once you make decisions, you will not always be right, and you will make some decisions that to some people would be like unthinkable. Why? Why did you do that? Well, The person made the decision, and now he gets or she gets to live with the consequences. And that is living. That is the attainment of wisdom comes from making decisions. But if you decide to stay within the walls of the garden, that's fine. I'm sure there's a lot of joy within that. But some people will never know. Because in order to understand, life is a paradox. In order for you to understand joy, you need to understand sadness and misery. You know, everything has its opposite. Life is a paradox, and you can understand the theory behind it, but unless you act it out, you will never know the wisdom. And I believe that a lot of the belief systems, whether it be Mormonism, it's Christianity, or Judaism, or Muslims, or Buddhism, whatever you decide to believe, there is eternal truth, universal truth that are instilled within all those belief systems. Remember, a lot of these existential questions, be it, these are the existential questions. Where do we come from? Why are we here? Where are we going? Are questions that have been asked and have been recorded since we started recording history hundreds and hundreds of years before Christianity. And like I said, I believe that whatever we learn in the scriptures are like metaphors. In order to make meaning of this life, the life experience, we have to develop certain theories to make life palatable, to be able to understand it. And as we go through life, we develop these theories, and then you create your value system, and you say you believe in something, and then you act it out, and your values and your actions, when they're congruent, then you're happy. But if you claim to believe in something but you don't, this is when people suffer. If you've gone to the temple, or if you ever go to the temple, there's a warning that Lucifer gives at the end of the. There's a video there that they used to show. I don't know how it is now, but Lucifer tells Adam and Eve that if they don't live up to the promises and the covenants that they've made in the altar in the temple at that moment, that he will have the power to possess the bodies that God had created for Adam and Eve. So I believe that there's a lot of truth in that. If you don't believe, if you don't act out your values, if you don't live up to your values, you will be like a puppet. You will be you will not be happy. You will be faced with consequences for every action, good or bad. There's consequences for everything. But the only way you can attain wisdom, almost as partaking of the apple, it's by making a decision, by acting it out and living with the consequences. Just because somebody knows the story, just because somebody knows the principle, it's a theory. So there's knowledge. And then how do you get wisdom? By applying the wisdom, making a good decision or a wrong decision, whatever that may be, and then living with the consequences. And this is how you get the wisdom. And they're not the same thing, knowledge and wisdom. There's a story in the Old Testament. Now, I'm sharing these stories and I'm talking about these things. I know in the Mormon belief that they say that all these things in the temple are sacred, and they're not, at least this is how I learned, that they're not to be spoken of outside the temple. If anybody takes the time to study the scriptures, all this knowledge is in the Old Testament. One has to just read the story and it's there. And we're not the only ones who possess that knowledge and understanding. And if it's not the story of the Garden of Eden, there's different stories, but they all they all hold within the same principle, the same value, sometimes told in a different way, but sooner or later we'll be faced with the decision of acting out our beliefs. And if we don't act out our beliefs by choice, something else will have the power to possess us. And we're like puppets acting out whatever. So there's nothing that the church has that nobody else has. The ritual is a little different, and yet it's strangely similar to a lot of the rituals of other churches and other belief systems. And to answer your question, why did I leave the church? It's because uh, if I claim to be right and I claim to have all that there is to know, and no additional knowledge will come unless it comes through my belief system, then I'm acting like the Zoramites. There's a warning in the Book of Mormon about that. The Zoramites and the Ramiamton. If you haven't read that, read it because it sounds strangely similar to what I'm saying. Uh, the moment you claim that, then you are negating other people, you are rejecting other people. The moment I say I know, it implies that the people that I'm talking to you who don't have my same belief system, that they're wrong. And if I make you wrong all the time, then I negate you as somebody who doesn't know. And I label you as something like that. And by definition, I have to reject you because you're not like me. And I'm rejecting your divinity, I'm rejecting your value. And if we do believe, and most belief systems believe in the value of the individual, the worth of a soul, and we believe in eternity and other lives. We're talking about eternity here. Everybody's in a different path, in a different point in their journey, and to label someone and judge them because they are not where we are, then it's to reject them. And we are all in this together. Everybody sooner or later gets faced with the same questions and the same choices. Everybody gets to learn these values in one way or another, and then they get faced with a choice to either act out your value or you don't. So if you have a value system, and criminals do have them, if you have a value system and you act it out and your actions and your values are congruent, you're happy. But if you're not, if you say, I believe in this, but you don't do anything about it, then you feel fragmented, you feel broken, you feel like life has no meaning. So why did I leave the church? Is because there are some ideas and values within the Mormon church. More than values, there are some ideas and way of looking at the world that make me feel that if I'm right and you are wrong, then I am negating or rejecting another brother or sister. And these questions are older than religion. They've existed and they've been recorded since the time we began recording history. And if somebody wants to be happy, okay, practice your religion, practice your belief system fully, and you will be happy. Like I said, the main point that I have with the church is that the Latter-day Saint Church is that they claim to have the truth, and to me that sounds strangely similar to Ramiamton and the Zoramites, I believe, and I don't want to reject other people because I want to love other people as I want to be loved. And if I perpetuate that belief system that because you don't believe in what I believe, you're different, and then I will continue. Be the change you want to be in the world, as Gandhi said, or karma, what you put out into the world comes back to you. And if I believe that I know and you don't, and therefore you're not like me, I'm rejecting your divinity. And if I'm rejecting your divinity, then I'm also rejecting the fact that eternity does exist and that people have, at some point, or many points in their life, will have the opportunity to redeem themselves. Whatever that means. We don't know. We're talking about eternity. And we think that we can put eternity in a nutshell, in a book, or two, or three. And we're all faced with the same challenges. And that's it. If people were to act out the values of, not necessarily the rituals, but the values of their own belief system, they will be happy. And yeah, Mormons can be extremely happy and joyful. if they were to act out the moral values that they claim to believe. And so do Jewish, so do Buddhists and Muslims. However, we do have this freedom of choice, and I give that right to everybody. Believe what you may, just don't try to enforce it on me or make me less because I don't subscribe to your flavor of belief system, and that's it. And everybody who's ever been in a religious system, especially like us, that we grew up in that belief system, and you'll never leave, because those eternal values and principles, those universal values and principles, are within all of us. And it's part of my language, it's part of my structure, it's part of the Western world. Our laws and beliefs and part of our culture in the Western world is based on Judeo-Christian beliefs and values. It's all over the place. We just need to discover them and act them out. Otherwise, we feel that there's something missing. And yeah, this is why I will never speak ill of the Mormon Church, because who am I to take that away from someone? Because the moment you take that from someone else, then you create a void, and something else will fill that void. Do I want to be responsible for that void that I create on somebody else? No. That was the hardest thing about leaving the church, was like, now there was a hole in there, and it needed to be filled. And as I studied books and different belief systems, I realized that we're all striving for the same. We all want to answer those questions. Purpose of life, why are we here? Where do we come from? Where are we going? And we're here to suffer in the same way that Adam and Eve, once they left the garden, it is through suffering and suffering well that we begin to give meaning to living. And the more responsibility we take on our shoulders, and the more we act out what we claim to believe, then the more meaning we get in life, in spite of all the suffering, because there is suffering. And I believe that in this world, in this life, there's more suffering than happiness. And yet within all that suffering, we can find meaning. And I think that is the juice of life, to find meaning within all the calamities of this life experience. And those are my thoughts. If you have any questions, it's easier to have a conversation with someone and bounce ideas back and forth. But that's what I believe, and that's why I'm happy. I'm happy, and whenever I'm unhappy is because there are things that I believe to be true, that are universal, that I'm not acting out, and that's it. Those are my thoughts on that question. If you have any further questions, please ask me, because I don't claim to know. This is how I understand it, and hey, it's eternity. So I will continue to polish my belief system, and I continue to act out some ideas and learn from my mistakes, and get knowledge, act it out, get wisdom from all my failures and from all my successes, and then I will become an old wise man, and then I will pass that on to my children and other generations, and that is how culture is passed, through storytelling. I will tell other people what worked for me and what didn't, and hopefully they will be able to, at some point, be faced with making the decisions and getting that wisdom on their own. You cannot give wisdom to the people you love. You can only give them knowledge. And yeah, that's it. You can only give the people that you care about knowledge, information. And once they are informed, information, then they can align themselves to march in the direction that they want. And those are my thoughts. Please tell me what you think. Thank you. Bye bye.